This happened about 20 years ago when I was 9. Even though I was just a kid, my parents have told me their side of the story so many times that I remember it like it was yesterday. My mom and dad, Lisa and Mark, were both scientists. They met while working at the Greenfield Environmental Research Center, a big government building where they studied the environment and helped create laws to protect it. Since it was a government facility filled with expensive equipment and important research, there were security guards on duty 24/7. During the day, the guards mostly sat at the front desk, greeting visitors and making sure everything ran smoothly. But at night, they had to walk through the whole building to make sure no one had broken in. There was one security guard, Tom, who always seemed like a really nice guy. Every time I went to my parents' work, he would talk to me, joke around, and even make paper airplanes for me to play with. He was really good at it too. Whenever my parents had to work late, he would keep me company in the lobby. We'd chat, toss paper planes, and watch TV. He seemed so friendly that my parents completely trusted him. Looking back, that was their biggest mistake. One night, my parents were working later than usual, past 10 p.m. Tom was on the night shift and suggested that I tag along with him while he did his security rounds. I thought it would be fun, so I said yes. We started on the top floor, walking through dark hallways. I stayed close behind, waiting for him to turn on the lights before stepping into each room. After checking all the offices, we went down to the second floor where my parents' labs were. The labs were packed with microscopes, machines, and all sorts of scientific equipment. Then, we moved to the first floor, where there were offices, filled with maps, old books, and even some preserved fish in jars used for decoration. Finally, we reached the basement levels. Instead of checking the right side first, which would have made more sense, he insisted we go left. As we walked, I noticed he was acting different. He was walking faster, and he seemed almost excited. We checked each lab, flipping the lights on as we entered and off as we left. When we got to the last room, Tom did something strange. He rushed over to a printer, grabbed 2 sheets of paper, and quickly folded them into airplanes. Then, he threw one across the room and told me it was mine. "Go get it," he said with a smile. Thinking nothing of it, I ran to pick up the plane, and that's when everything changed. The second I bent down to grab it, the light suddenly went out. Confused, I turned back toward the door, just in time to see Tom stepping out of the room and locking the door behind him. I ran straight to the door, pounding on it and screaming for him to open up. But through the small glass window, I saw him walking away, turning off the hallway lights as he disappeared around the corner. I was trapped. The room was pitch black, and I was terrified. My heart pounded as my mind filled with worst-case scenarios. I swear I saw shadows moving in the dark, though now I know it was just my imagination. I curled up in a corner, crying, completely confused and scared out of my mind. Why had he done this? What was going to happen to me? Meanwhile, my parents had finally finished work and were heading to the lobby to pick me up. But when they got there, I was nowhere to be found. Panic hit them instantly. They turned to Tom, demanding to know where I was. But all he said was, "Oh, we were doing the rounds and he must have gotten lost somewhere." That made no sense. This was a huge building, and there was no way a 9-year-old could just get lost without someone noticing. My parents immediately started searching every floor, yelling my name as they ran through the hallways. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually, I saw a faint light shining through the hallway outside. Gathering every bit of courage I had left, I rushed to the door and started banging on it as hard as I could. That's when they found me. My parents forced Tom to unlock the door, and the second I was out, I ran straight into my mom's arms, sobbing. That night, I was so shaken that I made her stay by my side until morning. I don't think I slept at all. Of course, my parents filed a complaint immediately. But when the police started investigating Tom, they discovered something shocking. He wasn't just a security guard. He had been working with a group of criminals, stealing computers and selling them on the black market, along with the sensitive research data stored on them. He was arrested, not for locking me in that dark room, but for his theft. But the scariest apart? I still don't know what his real plan was that night. Was he just trying to keep me out of the way so he could steal more equipment? Or was it something worse? I don't like to think about it too much. All I know is that I was lucky. Lucky that my parents found me in time. Lucky that I never had to find out what might have happened if they hadn't. And lucky that Tom never got the chance to do something like that to another kid. I work at a small grocery store in a quiet town, and honestly, I don't love it. The job itself is boring, the pay isn't great, and dealing with customers all day can be exhausting. Some people are rude, others are just weird. And then there are the ones who leave their carts in the middle of the aisle like they own the place. But it's my first job, and with no experience, it was the only place willing to hire me. When winter break started, my school was out for 3 weeks, which meant I could take on different shifts. My manager, Dan, told me I could try working overnight shifts if I wanted. At first, I wasn't sure. Staying up all night sounded miserable, but when I thought about it more, I realized it might be nice. No customers, no rushing around, just me, a quiet store, and a list of things to do at my own pace. That sounded way better than dealing with people during the day. I agreed to give it a shot, and on my first overnight shift, I was working with Liam, the night manager. He was pretty chill, way less uptight than Dan, and didn't mind if I listened to music while I worked. When I arrived, he gave me a list of tasks to do and then headed off to work on the other side of the store. It was just the two of us, but the store was big enough that I barely saw him. At first, I actually liked it. The store was quiet and I could move at my own pace. Without customers asking dumb questions every 5 minutes, I was able to focus and get a lot done. But after a couple of hours, the silence started to get to me. It was a strange kind of quiet, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every little noise. The hum of the freezers, the faint sound of Liam's footsteps on the other side of the store, the occasional creak of the building settling. It wasn't exactly scary, but it made me feel on edge, like something wasn't quite right. By the time 2 a.m. rolled around, I was feeling tired and restless, so I decided to take my break. I let Liam know, grabbed my food from the break room, and went outside to sit in my car. That's when I noticed him. A man was standing near the side of the building, looking into the store's front windows. The parking lot was completely empty, except for my car and Liam's, and the only light came from inside the store. There was no reason for anyone to be out here this late. The guy was tall with short hair and was wearing a dark leather jacket and old boots. He stood completely still, his face almost pressed against the glass like he was trying to see inside. Something about him gave me the creeps. I kept watching him as I ate. For my entire 10-minute break, he didn't move an inch. He just stood there, staring. When my break was over, I got out of my car and started walking toward the front doors. I moved quickly, hoping I could get inside before he noticed me. No such luck. As soon as I was halfway across the parking lot, he turned his head and looked right at me. His eyes were dark and empty, like he hadn't slept in days. His face had no expression at all, just completely blank. I kept walking, pretending not to notice, but my heart started racing when he suddenly started walking toward me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached the door. I fumbled for my keys, unlocked it as fast as I could, and slipped inside. Just as I shut the door, I heard him call out. I ignored him. Something inside me told me not to stop, not to talk to him, not to even look at him. Maybe I was being rude, but I didn't care. My gut was screaming at me that something was off. Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, I went to the back to use the restroom and then got back to work. But after a few minutes, I felt this nagging urge to check the front windows again, just to make sure. When I walked up to the glass, my heart skipped a beat. He was gone. Not in the parking lot, not anywhere in sight. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe he had just been some random guy wandering around. Maybe he wasn't dangerous. Maybe I was overreacting. Then the alarm went off. A loud, shrill sound blasted through the grocery store, making me jump. I knew immediately what it was. The back door alarm. That door led to the storage area behind the store, where deliveries came in and trash was taken out. Sometimes managers accidentally tripped it when throwing things in the dumpster, but tonight, it was just Liam and me. My stomach sank as I made my way toward the back. The closer I got to the storage room doors, the worse the feeling in my gut got. If it was just Liam, he would have shut the alarm off by now. Then I heard it. Loud, heavy thuds, like someone slamming against a door. I hesitated for a second, then pushed the door open. Silence. The back door was wide open, and Liam was nowhere in sight. "Liam?" I called out. No answer. Then, out of nowhere, a head slowly peeked around the far corner of the hallway. My stomach flipped. It was him. The man from outside. His eyes were just as dark and empty as before, his face just as blank. My body froze. Then I ran. I sprinted through the store, past the shelves, past the registers, and straight out the front doors. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and with shaking hands called 911. That's when I realized I had no idea where Liam was. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing as they pulled up. They rushed inside, and within minutes they found Liam safe but terrified. He told them the man had broken in and chased him. Liam had barely made it into the manager's office before, slamming the door and locking himself inside. The loud banging sounds I had heard, that was the guy trying to break the door down. The second I ran out, the man must have realized the cops were coming because he took off before they arrived. The security cameras caught a blurry image of his face. We printed it out and hung it in the back room so the employees could be on the lookout. As far as we know, he hasn't come back, and I still don't know what he wanted that night. But one thing's for sure. I'm really glad I trusted my gut. I work as a delivery rider in a small town where everyone knows each other. My job is simple. I pick up packages and letters from bigger towns and bring them back to our little outpost. It's not the best paying job, but I don't mind. I like the quiet, and I get to be out on the road with my horse Pepper. One evening I was running late. I had made my last delivery just after sunset, and I knew it would take too long to get home before dark. So I decided to camp near an old sawmill that had been abandoned for years. Some folks say it's haunted, but I'd stayed there before and never saw anything spooky. It was a familiar spot, and I figured I'd be safer there than trying to navigate the dark roads back to town. The ruins of the sawmill sat at the edge of a thick forest. Most of the structure had crumbled away over time, leaving only a few standing beams and a stone foundation. A half-collapsed shack sat off to the side, probably an old storage shed. I set up my little camp near a clearing where Pepper could rest and graze. The night was quiet, with only the sound of insects and the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. I was brushing down Pepper when I noticed something odd. A small light flickered between the trees, maybe 100 yards away. It wasn't a fire, too still for that. It looked more like a lantern, but whoever was holding it wasn't moving. It just hovered there, glowing softly. I frowned. Who else would be out here this late? At first I thought it might be another traveler, maybe a hunter, but something about it didn't sit right with me. If someone had set up camp nearby, why wouldn't they have approached the sawmill where there was open ground? Why just stand in the trees holding a light? I took a few cautious steps forward, squinting into the dark. The light remained motionless. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself it was nothing, it moved. Not like someone walking or adjusting their grip. It slid, smoothly, sideways, disappearing behind a tree in a way that made my skin crawl. That's when I heard it. A twig snapping, not far, maybe 50 feet in front of me, hidden in the trees. I froze, straining my ears. There was a faint rustling sound like someone shifting their weight. Someone was there, watching. I turned on my heel and walked straight back toward Pepper, my heart pounding harder with every step. I wasn't about to call out, wasn't about to wait and see who or what was lurking in those woods. I had just grabbed the reins when I heard something else. Footsteps, fast, coming straight toward me. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just threw myself onto Pepper's saddle and kicked hard. She hesitated, sensing my fear, but then bolted forward, her hooves kicking up dirt and leaves as we tore down the path. For a moment, I thought I was safe. Then in the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow, running through the trees. Not just running, sprinting. A man dressed in dark clothing, moving at an unnatural speed, keeping pace with us despite the fact that Pepper was galloping at full speed. His body weaved effortlessly between the trees, his long strides impossibly. Quick! I clenched the reins and leaned forward, urging Pepper to go even faster. She was already breathing hard, but I wasn't stopping. Not until we were far from that place. As we neared the edge of the forest, I risked one last glance over my shoulder. The man had stopped running. He stood there, just at the tree line, watching. His face was hidden in the shadows, but I could feel his stare, cold, calculating, as if he had been expecting me all along. I didn't stop riding until I reached the outpost. I barely even slowed down as we entered town, galloping straight to the sheriff's office. I was shaking when I finally climbed off my horse. The sheriff listened as I told him what had happened. He didn't say much, just rubbed his chin thoughtfully before nodding. "You're not the first," he finally said. I blinked. "What?" He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You wouldn't believe how many riders and travelers have come back with the same story. A man in the woods, a strange light, and always near the old sawmill." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Who is he?" The sheriff shook his head. "No one knows. Some folks say it's a ghost. Someone who died out there years ago, still wandering the woods. Others say it's something worse." I left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers. The next morning, after getting some rest, I forced myself to ride back to the sawmill to collect my gear. Everything was just as I had left it, except for my saddlebag. It had been torn open, its contents scattered across the ground. Someone had gone through it. I checked my things. Nothing was missing, but something had been added. At the bottom of the bag, buried beneath my clothes, was an old rusted key. I never camped near that sawmill again.